Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ESAA Regulatory Forum. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to the presenters. Just a quick update. All the presentations are being recorded and they'll be available after, and I will send out an email at the conclusion of today once the videos are processed. And we'll try to take some breaks where we can. We have one scheduled for 10:10, and then we have a lunch and then an afternoon. So we'll get started. I'm going to switch over to Lars DePaul, the Executive Director with the Orphan Well Association, for the first update. So just bear with us while we make the change. Let's hope this works.
Able to see the presentation, Joe?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, I'll get started then.
Yeah, and I'll turn off my camera and we'll come back when it's question time. And just for everyone's sake, sorry, if you have questions, you can ask them on the questions on the control panel, and then we'll get to them in the question part at the end of the presentations. Also, you'll see a tab at the bottom of your screen, hopefully, that says handouts. There's a PDF in there with all the bios for the speakers, and in some cases, the abstract of what they're speaking about today. So you can download that, print it off, or look at it. So Lars, over to you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Joe. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Obviously a different format. This is one of the first ones I've done like this. And so it's a lot different being in the office doing this presentation and not seeing the audience here and interacting with you guys individually. Okay, so just always like to start our presentations to ground people on understanding of what the Orphan Well Association is and what it is not, as there tends to be a lot of misunderstanding when people get into it and have their own interpretations. So first of all, we're a not-for-profit organization, and we operate under the delegated authority of the energy regulator. But we are still financially and legally separate from the AER, so we're not a government organization. What that delegated authority means is that the energy regulator has certain powers to do decommissioning and reclamation work on orphan assets, but they designate those powers to us, and we do them on their behalf. The other component that I always like to remind people is that we are primarily funded by the Alberta oil and gas industry. So the enabling legislation that allows us within our powers, the two main ones are the Orphan Fund Delegated Administration Regulation and the Oil and Gas Conservation Act. And as many of you will know, those were amended in mid-2020. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about today and some of those components around there. As far as our corporate focus, for ourselves for this year, it remains the same as it has for the last couple of years. And the three pillars that we focus on are safety, efficiency, and inventory reduction. To give you a sense of where we were last year and what our goals are for this year, you can see our results for 2019, and I'd call them industry-leading results. We did have improved cost metrics related to our main tasks around well abandonment, pipeline abandonment, and reclamation, and also a significant inventory reduction. For our goals for 2020, we want to continue to improve those cost metrics, and as you can see within those inventory reduction numbers, we do have an aggressive program on trying to reduce that inventory for this year. So on the legislative and regulatory components, just want to talk a little bit about the process that we're going through to implement some of the change. Our first component that we're focusing on relates to a governance component and the Orphan Well Association bylaws and how the association is governed. We've gone through a lot of changes in the last couple of years, specifically in relation to the number of orphan sites and the amount of money that we're handling. And so there is an opportunity here that we're looking to revise our governance components. Now, from a governance component, the members of the association, which are CAP, EPAC, and the AER, are actually the ones that approve our bylaw changes. So we're sort of in the middle of this process right now. The next big component is that we have a memorandum of understanding with the OWA, AER, and Alberta Environment, and we're reviewing those components to understand what that should look like, or should we have something like this or something different. There's obviously a lot of tax implications that we need to think about as well, specifically related to the Canadian Revenue Agency and our not-for-profit status. There's a lot of changes in the regulations that we need to understand before so we avoid any potential tax implications. We want to understand the impact of these regulatory changes, and by doing that, we want to prioritize which regulatory changes are most important and implement them based on our priorities. The next component is obviously we want to communicate and engage with stakeholders, and so that they can understand what changes are happening and how they impact our stakeholders. These are the 7 key changes that I see from the OGCA and OFTAR changes that were implemented in June of 2020. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time focusing on these 5. The first one there related to the additional protection for OW directors. I mean, that was something that was important to us, but it was simply a legislative change and allowed for put in more protection for those directors. So on the first component here, one of the things that was very important to us is the ability to fund, appoint and fund receivers. The previous versions of the legislation were silent on the issue, and we did appoint receivers and fund receivers during that period. You know, looking back into the Redwater decision, there was this influx of a certain number of receiverships that if the OWA did not appoint a receiver, that nobody would. The lenders to those organizations did not want to appoint a receiver after they understood the Redwater decision, and so we had to just step into that space. Now, realistically, from a legal component, appointing a receiver, anybody can appoint a receiver. There's really no limitation to that. But the component really comes about funding a receiver, especially in a bankruptcy where there's no funds to actually run a sales process, for example, or shut in assets. So really, now we have that explicit ability to appoint and fund receivers and trustees, which is very important. The next component is around a new definition in the Oil and Gas Conservation Act, and it's called reasonable care and measures. I put the definition on here and highlighted a couple components that you can read there. So this is a new one, and it hasn't been used yet as far as I know, but it really provides the regulator with a lot of latitude in directing whether it's a licensee, a WIP, or the Orphan Well Association to provide reasonable care and measures. Some examples that we sort of have, it could include emergency response, securing the site, or addressing liquids on site. But this can be applied at any time through the life cycle. If the AER orders reasonable care and measures, any component that would be from a defunct company would be capable of being reimbursed by the Orphan Fund, similar to how we deal with abandonment orders right now. So speaking of abandonment orders, this is one of our new powers in the legislation. As many of you will know, previously the Orphan Well Association could only work on orphan sites. Those would be sites that have 100% working interest. Any site that was less than 100%, the WIPs were ordered to undertake the abandonment and reclamation order under those abandonment orders, and the OWA would provide that reimbursement after the work was done. So after the well was cut and capped or a reclamation certificate issued. Now we have the capability to enter into an agreement with the WIP or WIPs to do that work. It has to be licensed to a defunct company though. So it is pretty important though. I mean, first one here is that from our benchmarking, we do find that the industry working interest claims that we receive are in the order of about twice as much as what we're doing the work for. And really this is sort of relates to the component of, you know, the volume that we're doing are area-based closures versus one-offs that are coming from individual companies. This also has an impact on the WIPs themselves, as they have to carry all these costs until the reimbursement happens, which again is at the end of the abandonment or reclamation certificate issued. And from our review here, it does appear that a lot of the wells have been abandoned, but very few of the sites have been reclaimed. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that reclamation has been started and just not reimbursed, or if it hasn't been started at all. So we are in the process of drafting an agreement, and we've got a pilot project planned, and we want to be starting this here probably in the next month or so. The next component, there are aspects that now we have the capability to either purchase or lease land for closure activities. As we are not the licensee, we couldn't undertake this before, but we did think it was an important component for risk assessments, as an example, to have this in our back pocket. The other component that we are now able to enter into agreements is to reduce or prevent the occurrence of orphan properties. And again, this is one that, as we don't know what the future would look like, it would be good to have a component that we can take certain actions to protect the collective. So if you've seen any of my presentations before, you've probably seen these slides before. I do like to sort of give people an update on where we're at on our inventory. Not going to spend much time going through the historical here. You can see that starting in April 1 of 2019, our inventory was over about 3,000. This last year, we abandoned nearly 1,000 wells, and we got less than that number coming into the inventory. So you can see that our curve actually bent down in our last fiscal year. As I mentioned previously, we have an aggressive abandonment program planned for this year, but the unknown is how many new sites are going to be coming to us. This is a snapshot of our overall inventory right now. You can see the number of sites that we have for sites that need to be decommissioned, then reclamation, and our pipeline segments as well for abandonment. So I did talk about that unknown. There's a number of insolvencies that are going on right now. And we expect that some of these sites will become orphans at some point. They're just not at that point right now. So the numbers I'm putting up here are not orphaned as of yet. We don't know how many are coming to us, but you can see through the OWA appointed receivers, there's a fair number of wells in those receiverships. And there's also CCAA receiverships or trustee proceedings that we're not directly involved with, but that could have a material impact to the Orphan Well Association. On the funding side, our industry contributions to date are $374 million. I do like to acknowledge the provincial government and the federal government for previous grants in 2009 and the loans from 2017 and 2020. And again, those as they are loans. Many of you'll know that the levy for 2020 was just issued for $65 million, and the proposed levy is $70 million for next year. As far as our expenditures go for this year, our overall budget is $200 million. The green bar at the top of it is our loan repayments. So you can see that for the next couple of years, we're repaying loans of $30 million a year. You can see that our plan is to move from well abandonments, a focus on that over the last couple of years, and start to be focusing more on site reclamation as those sites move through the full process. Give you a sense of what our current debt obligations are, and this will sort of give you a sense of what the levy might be in future years. So the loan funds that we received will be spent over the next 3 years, but then that we're going to have close to $500 million in debt obligations. So if you're looking at future levies, this would be just debt repayments. We would still need to have some component of inventory reduction, repaying working interest claims, and funding receivers, and then the general administrative charges for running the association. So ongoing issues that could impact the OWA. Obviously, we're going through an implementation of a regulatory change that has some organizational changes to us. We're still dealing with impacts from our successful appeal of the Redwater Energy case. We're still dealing with organizations that are going through CCAA or bankruptcy proceedings, ones that we're not funding and dealing with the receivers. We have taken the stance that we are only going to support transfers where all of the assets go to other parties, and that there will be no sites coming to the Orphan Well Association unless they're ones that are being dealt with and funded by the Orphan Well Association. I mentioned a little bit previously about the Sequoia resources one. This is obviously a big legal case right now, and as many of you will know, the OWA has applied to intervene in this action, along with some other industry participants. So this is an application to set aside the transaction from Perpetual to what eventually became Sequoia, and then Sequoia with Alphabet. The last component is around the Mazeppa gas plant. As many of you'll know, is that this site still has not been designated as an orphan. It's still in the care and custody of the AER. So these last two ones have been an ongoing issue that could impact the OWA for the last couple of years, and I'm not really sure that the first one will be resolved at any time in the near future. I am hopeful that the Mazeppa gas plant will be dealt with here in the next coming months. So in summary, we're the delegated authority of the energy regulator to undertake the decommissioning and reclamation of orphan properties. Our focus really again is around safety, efficiency, and inventory reduction. Again, we're funded by the oil and gas industry in Alberta, which includes the 2017-2020 Alberta loans and the loan from the Government of Canada. And we're in the process of implementing the regulatory change based on the priorities in our organization. And as always, if you want more information, you can go and visit our website. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Lars. If there's any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions box. Lars, from me, what is OWA's involvement, if any, and I think I know the answer, with the SRP program?
Yeah, so we are not involved. We are not eligible for any of the funding. We are providing some suggestions and advice to the government along with other organizations. Beside that, we're not involved. I think one of the components that we may see is that there may be grant monies provided to companies that in some point in the future may go insolvent, and so there might be some involvement from us, but at this time there isn't any.
Okay, can you, if possible, re-show the slide with the inventory of assets that you have?
Oh, you're gonna ask for me to.
Wow, someone's asked. If not, everyone, if not, the slides will be available for the presentations after. And there's also, go back to the slide with costs and surface equipment. Okay, once again, we'll get to the slides will be available in the videos after. When you specify that WIC are coming in higher than what the OWA, how much higher are these claims? Is there this opportunity to discuss where savings can be made?
Yeah, so a couple components in there. We are tending to be at about 50% of Directive 11, and the working interest claims are above Directive 11. So it kind of depends. There's obviously some that are lower and some that are higher. And so, there's a couple components that we're more than happy to provide input prior to programs, and we do get AFEs. We do request AFEs beforehand. It's not a requirement, but it can help provide some of that input from beforehand. And we have provided multiple other venues to give other producers feedback on what we're doing so that they can take some of those learnings that we've had and use them. So it kind of depends on the mechanism that individuals would be looking for, but we're more than happy to share that. We've also been looking at other venues to be able to provide it on a more regular basis and feedback, but always happy to share what we've learned.
Okay. From me, did OWA receive any additional funding from the federal government with any of the announcements that went to the province, or was it all just SRP?
So yeah, we did receive an offer of a loan of $200 million. It hasn't been finalized yet, but that was part of the same announcement when the SRP program was announced. So the provinces received grants, we received a loan.
Okay. Then I have these higher costs, is that abandonment and decommissioning or related to rec rem?
I'm assuming that's around working interest claims?
Yeah, same,
okay.
same person, yeah.
So I would say that we probably receive, of the claims, 90–95% of them are abandonment or decommissioning claims. Very few of them are remediation or reclamation. So, I mean, that's one of the components that we're really not sure whether the reclamation has been started or not. We just see them at the end after the reclamation certificate is issued. So those higher costs are on abandonment, but that's because of the virtue of us receiving almost all abandonment claims.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you. Okay, there's no other questions. So again, we'll have the slides will show up in the videos later today, and I'll send out an email to everyone. So Lars, I know you have to go to another meeting, so thank you for this. Appreciate your time. So again, thanks, and we'll move on to our next presentation. Steve Saddleback's our next presenter. Steve, I've noticed you signed in as a attendee. Can you try signing in as a presenter? I sent you a specific list. That would be great. Thank you. Just bear with us, everyone, for a second while I try to we get Steve connected, our next presenter. Sorry, everyone, we're still, I'm still waiting for Steve to connect. Good chance to get a coffee. Hopefully he connects right away. He was online, so just give me a couple minutes. Sorry about this. Hi, Steve. Can you hear me?
Hi, Joe. Apologies. Is that working?
Yeah, it is. Okay, let me switch the control to you. I assume you have present slides.
Yes.
I just switched control to you, Steve.
Perfect.
Just give 1 second. It should pop up on your screen. Okay, everyone. Thanks. Sorry about that short delay.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Early.
Apologies. This technology stuff is as much as I joke and I say I'm a tech guy. Then times like this happen and prove that I've still got some learning to do.
Yeah. Okay. So, Steve, you should be able to bring your desktop up.
Fantastic. So I will bring that down. Computer screen up and. Apologies, we're just going to run through the technical part of this side.
Did you get a message that said share your screen? Did you get a message that said share your screen?
It's just saying that to allow. So I'm running on a Mac, so I'm not sure if it's any different than the.
Shouldn't be. There we go.
We good?
Yeah, I just need your presentation. There we go.
Awesome.
Just so everybody knows, Steve Saddleback's the director of the National Energy Business Center of Excellence with the Indian Resource Council, and he is also a member of the Industry Advisory Committee for the SRP program. So I'll turn it over to Steve, and at the end we'll come back for questions. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks a bunch, Joe, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone here today. I guess first things I'd like to acknowledge is that although our session is being held virtually here today, I'd like to take a time for everybody just to think about the lands that we're gathered on here today. Although we're gathered virtually, we are in a physical space, wherever that may be. In the province of Alberta has a long history of Indigenous communities that have been in the territories and taking care of the land, which really falls in line with the with ESAA's initiatives and mandate. So it really take the time to think about that and do want to thank you for attending here today and also having me. My name is Steve Saddleback. I'm from the Samson Cree Nation in Treaty 6 in Muskwachees, which is located in central Alberta. If you haven't been, it's between Ponoka and Wetaskiwin, kind of along Highway 2. And my role is the director of the National Energy Business Center of Excellence at the Indian Resource Council of Canada. IRC is a association of First Nations involved in responsible energy development. We're a national organization. We're about 170 plus members across Canada, mainly concentrated in the western provinces in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, a couple members in Manitoba, some board members in Ontario, and then spreading out east. We don't currently operate in the territories, but that being said, it's more due to the capacity than anything. We're a small shop. We're made up of 6 people, but serving a national mandate, we deliver a lot of our programming through strategic partnerships. So some of the mandates at IRC, I forgot to mention, we were also formed in 1987. So the organization has been around for a number of years, and we were made up of 60 chiefs that had concerns about the federal government acting on their best interest when it came to their natural resource development. So our mandates here are to support First Nations in their efforts to attain greater management and control of their natural resources, to complement initiatives by First Nations for economic self-reliance and ensure the preservation of those Crown trust obligations under the treaties with First Nations. So ensuring the federal government is sticking, both the federal government and the provinces are sticking to their fiduciary responsibilities. Thirdly, we coordinate the promotion of initiatives with the federal and provincial government and industry. So acting as a liaison when it comes to that, that piece within being that, I guess, middle neutral ground and working with First Nations to have better relationships with both the federal government, the provincial government, as well as industry when it comes to development of their natural resources. We encourage greater development and utilization of First Nations human resources, and so basically getting our members in our First Nation communities to work. And if there's some development that's happening in and around the communities, that we're looking at all opportunities to be able to bring local members to assist with that capacity to both create those long-term careers as well as cut down costs for when it comes to those industries and those licensee holders that are in the area. It's a lot cheaper than it is, to use local equipment, as we know, versus, doing a haul or a hot shot from across the province. And lastly, it's to transform Indian Oil and Gas Canada, apologies for the acronym there, which is the federal organization that oversees on reserve oil and gas development, into a First Nations institution. We work in partnership with Indian Oil and Gas Canada. We're on a co-management board to not only provide oversight to what is the daily activities of IOGC, but also to raise any concerns and look for opportunities to make life a little easier in terms of cutting down red tape, making having things applications go through a little faster, but also looking for opportunities to implement new technologies and do things in a more efficient and responsible manner. So that work with the transforming the IOGC actually was approved last year, and we've currently got a team that's looking at that to eventually have more First Nations involved in the administration of that program, of that department, sorry. The co-management board is made up of First Nation chiefs from across Canada, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. The president and CEO, Stephen Buffalo. The assistant deputy minister from, this is an old slide, so apologies, it should be ISC, Indigenous Services Canada. The executive director from Indian Oil and Gas Canada, as well as we have an industry representative to bring things from the industry side. So that's Brian Schmidt from Tamarack Valley Energy. Really what it comes down to is about having good working relationships. These are some of the organizations that we've worked with, and this is no particular order or manner or anything like that. I just grabbed a couple of logos and wanted to display to show that, from IRC side, when we're involved in the life cycle of projects, it's always to have those good working relationships and keeping that dialogue open with different organizations. We're happy to be here with ESAA today and look forward to a long-term relationship. One of the mandates of IRC is to work on the regulatory and the laws and regulations when it comes to oil and gas development. We have a team called the Joint Technical Committee, which is comprised of technical experts as well as representatives from First Nations that work on the development of these laws. The previous Indian Oil and Gas Act dated back to the 1970s. And I kind of chuckle and I say that, well, those laws and in the spirit and intent of those were done with, done very well. That technology has changed since the 70s. And now it's looking at improving those and ensuring that we have a more robust set of regulations that is a little clearer and provides better opportunity to get projects built. So that technical committee comprises of folks from the First Nations working in partnership with Indian Oil and Gas Canada, as well as the federal government, sending regulations to those draft regulations and suggestions to Ottawa, putting pen to paper on what is being done in First Nation communities across Canada. This is just an update from the JTC1 of the work that's going on as of this year. Understanding that First Nations have been impacted by COVID and a lot of communities, my community has of Samson has actually implemented a curfew and shutting things down for a number of things. But regardless and despite all of those challenges, they've continued work. From JTC 1 side of things, phase 1 has been completed and in effect since last fall. The regulations came into effect on August 1st of 2019, and phase 2 has begun, and we've got members that are currently working on drafting those new regulations. The First Nations are working on the environmental module, so this is something that's phase 1. What I guess I'd let our audience know is that phase 1 took 10 years. It took 10 years to be able to get that phase 1 regulations just implemented. And you have a lot of folks go, well, 10 years, that's a long time. And I would agree, absolutely. A decade of working on those regulations is a long time, but there was a lot of back and forth and some challenges when working with different parties to ensure that you get things right. From IRC side of things, just being honest, we've had to walk away from the table a few times, and that was or had to walk away from the table once, and that was it was just due to not seeing eye to eye in terms of the protection of the environment and of our nations. When working with those, coming back to the table and ensuring that we do have those good working relationships, keeping that dialogue open, and then ultimately coming back to agreement at the end was a big win. Seeing the regulations put into place was a huge day for many folks, and we were happy to see that continue. So the module with environment in phase 2 is very complex. That's the time frame, and for completion, it'll go into the next fiscal year. Indian Oil and Gas Canada is responsible for consulting with industry and First Nations. However, an IRC is available upon request, and so we work and we'll go into First Nations when they request updates on that. As the director of the National Energy Business Center of Excellence, some of my mandates are to work with communications, research, economic development, education, engagement and networking, then legislation and compliance. Some of the communication that we do is that we talk about what's happening with Indigenous and First Nations involvement in the energy sector. We produce now it's moved to a biannual magazine. So some stories, some highlights of what's going on within industry, and some things to watch out to just be mindful of, and some exciting developments. A copy of it is available on the IRC website, as well as the National Energy Business Center Excellence website at nepsi.com. We do research, and this was a document there, First Nations engagement in the energy sector in Western Canada. A copy of this is available on our website, alongside the University of Saskatchewan, looking at and really trying to demonstrate that First Nations are involved in the energy sector and are involved in responsible energy development, have been for years, dating back to some of the first wells that were developed within the province. And we've got a couple of research projects that we're working on currently, and we're excited to take the wraps off of those and send those out later on this year. When it comes to economic development, the center works with First Nations, industry, as well as individuals on looking at opportunities for them to be involved within the energy sector. Just a couple examples there is, we've got great relationships with Heart Lake First Nations and their construction company. We just had one of their nation members attending an education session that we're holding here up in Edmonton. I'm currently up here in Edmonton. We're doing the course for Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 members. So we also work on that life cycle approach, looking at getting individuals interested in careers in energy, providing the training and education opportunities, employment and business support. So looking at how do we get folks access to capital? what are opportunities for funding. We recognize that funding is a challenge for everyone. So what are the options out there, and how do we provide those supports and those those contacts, and then ultimately bringing back to the mentorship, bringing those that have been involved, both both those that have been successful and those that have seen the challenges and not necessarily for whatever reason or haven't been successful, but to be able to provide that real world experience and saying this is how things have worked, for better or for worse. And then when it comes to education, we do our education program. We deliver Pipeline 101, Petroleum Industry 101, the petroleum industry for executives in a shortened form. We've got a couple examples here. Up in the top right, this was way back, and this is dating us. And so this was back to the NFORM, when NFORM, under the NFORM banner, and on top right there, we have our president CEO, Stephen Buffalo, coming and talking to a class. Bottom right, we have a demonstration of a hydrovac out in the First Nations community, a couple of members there, seeing what hydrovacing is about and interested in a career in hydrovacing. And then to the left there is taking folks through the gas plant over at SAIT and understanding how a gas plant works, talking about the life cycle of it and understanding all aspects of it. Currently, we have a program here out in Enoch that is looking at well site abandonment and reclamation, as well as alternative uses for wells that are mature in their life cycle. We provide engagement and networking events. Now, understanding that we are under COVID, we've provided a few monthly updates, but we're looking to, we're excited and really hopeful that we'll be back to being able to meet people face to face and having our large gatherings again soon. But that being said, understanding that safety is priority number one, and ensuring that that we can look at different opportunities such as these virtual gatherings for to continue to promote those relationships. Legislation and compliance. So when it comes to the changes regarding the Indian Oil and Gas Act and JTC1, that's where we do that outreach and take those developments into communities, sharing what the changes they should be aware of, and then ultimately how these are going to affect them, and assisting with answering questions. Some exciting stuff that we're working on. On the left side there, we're cataloging and developing a database of indigenous companies from across Canada. Because one thing that we're finding is that there's a lot of questions when it comes to, I used to work down in downtown Calgary prior to starting with IRC, and I often heard, we want to do business with First Nation communities. I'd love to work with the First Nation community, absolutely. I don't know where they're located. I don't know anybody from there. Do they even have any companies? What kind of services are provided? I don't know. And that's more from the aspect of just not having that opportunity, recognizing we all come from different paths and have different lived experiences. So being able to work and provide that, provide a tool to be able to have that first step into a community. Folks can easily access that database if they're an IRC member, and then from there, give somebody a cold call if they like, or on the flip side is saying, hey, let's meet for a cup of coffee, and let's, Steve, would you be able to set something up? And yeah, from there we can assist with those kind of introductions. On the right side there, we have the Redevelop program that I'm the program or co-chair of the program advisory committee. That's made up of 5 different universities that you see there that are looking at overseeing right now. It's a 6-year program, 32 master's PhD students that are looking at fracking and the challenges that come with it. We recognize that fracking is there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's recognizing that, not burying our heads in the sand, and from there taking those challenges head on, putting folks and young bright minds that are much smarter than myself out to work and to look at those challenges, and maybe it's alternative uses to water, or we've looked at induced seismicity, pipeline versus rail, and we were actually up in community last week with a couple of our students doing water sampling in Slave Lake. So looking at what are the impacts of there and how does that how is that affecting the community. So this is just a quick slide on the redevelop program, talking about what work is, exactly, training the graduate students, providing Indigenous undergrad summer interns the experience to build those long-term careers and experience within community. Ultimately doing that data research within community, providing that, empowering those communities by leaving that data with them. This isn't stuff that is developed by U of C and the 5 different universities only to go and sit in somebody's library and to never be looked at again. It's really kind of going, let's develop this with community, work in partnership, get that data, and then provide that to the community to do what they will. And for some it's looking at policy. For some it's looking at, well, how do we do things better? And ultimately, we're doing outreach to the Indigenous high school students. As you see there, we reached out to Sucker Creek First Nation, and we were talking with a bunch of the youth from the community, talking about careers in energy development. They were really excited to hear about the reclamation programs and the work in that, and also as well as alternative energies and what does the future hold, and how can we make oil and gas development, recognizing that we're going to always need it. But how do we make it more efficient? Some of the things that our students receive is a redeveloped certificate, Indigenous relations training. So they go through the Writing Symbols Lodge and go through an intensive program, which is, I believe, 4 days of understanding what the history is of Canada and understanding truth and reconciliation, the calls to action, understanding UNDRIP and all of that. And it's an involved, in-depth course, working with local knowledge holders as well as elders to get a better sense and understanding of what how our relationship with Canada came to be where it is today, and then what are the opportunities for building that relationship on the path forward. The skills that the students receive during the Redevelop Challenge are project management, public consultation, and understanding the perceptions, as well as the industry organization psychology, and in all aspects involved with that. All students, whether they're graduate, undergraduate, and high school, are scholarship recipients. And we do have a mentorship pipeline model, which is transferable to communities. So bringing those from all of from the elementaries to the high schools, post-secondary, and industry together to everyone, and being both equal and a level working, a level field, and then understanding and learning from each other and providing that ongoing mentorship and that outreach. We were really excited. We've got a young engineer that's is starting here in the Edmonton area this fall. So came out of this program and was really excited about it, and now is as of last week was talked to him, and he's successfully applied to one of the post-secondaries here. So we all understand, we've heard it, and thank you to our previous presenter, is that we've got the SRP program. How I won't go into this because I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. So IRC is involved with the site rehabilitation program from the government of Alberta and those federal dollars that have flowed, by being the co-chairs of the Indigenous Steering Committee, as well as participating in the other committees such as the industry outreach. One thing, we've followed this over some time now, and we're really excited about period 4, and that was the $100 million tranche, which is currently open until March 31st of next year, which provides those with the 2020 area-based closure programs to revive those programs, bring them back. 50% funding will be provided to any licensee, provided that they revive those programs and bring them and get that work happening. And then 100% of those programs will be covered if they use an Indigenous service company. So and here's some of the Indigenous company criteria. All of this information is available on the Government of Alberta website, so I won't spend too much time on that. And I can make these slides available as well. Here are some of the companies that are under the period 4 of the SRP program. This is all public information as well. And that's kind of what brings me to the end. I know that we're kind of we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and then you know, I didn't want to go over, but we are excited from the IRC's perspective of being able to you know, participate in programs like this and understand that you know, we're here to work with you know, as many folks as in terms of cleaning up the environment, doing reclamation in the proper manner, understanding what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for growth, putting those relationships together with new you know, with new partners and the, you know, First Nations and industry, and for our future. So that's that would conclude my presentation at this time.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. Really good information. What's one of the biggest challenges IRC and yourself face with anything you're involved with? And then I have some other questions that have already started popping up for you. So
for sure. You know, I guess the biggest challenge right now is, you know, from a number of standpoints, it would be different for different projects. From the JTC one, you know, bringing folks together and understanding many of our remote communities don't even have internet connection. That's just a reality in 2020. So, you know, similar to everywhere else, if you go out into a northern remote community, well, that's great. You got a cell phone. It's a fantastic paperweight, right? If you're sitting on a lease site up in northern Alberta, or even some places in southern Alberta. So, yeah, you know, connectivity and ensuring that we continue on that is a reality. Getting those, you know, getting the regulations and everything put together. Our teams are going to be meeting in the next couple of weeks here, so we're excited for that continued work. From the business center side of things, you know, definitely continuing on that dialogue of supporting those companies that are, COVID is reality. We see businesses shuttered in First Nation communities across Canada. It's not, you know, this isn't an Indigenous, non-Indigenous thing or anything like that. It's a humanity thing, and we, you know, our communities are feeling the effects. We see the downturn within the industry and all of those challenges that build up with each other. And from the IRC's perspective, we're just trying to figure out how do we, you know, how do we continue to provide supports and those, you know, those opportunities going forward where they may be. For period 4, we're excited about that program because it provides an incentive for, well, for First Nation communities to be able to get their foot in the door, if you will. Because as we know, you know, industry, and you know, there's no hiding about it. Is the industry will often have their preferred vendors and those long-term relationships, and no knock to those guys and you know, those companies, they've built that, you know, hats off to them. But for those startups and everything, it's being able to get that foot in the door, that first conversation, which can be one of the biggest challenges. So we're excited about that period 4 is because we're going, not only are we able to clean up those wells, but at the same time, hopefully provide that long-term opportunity for, you know, to cut down costs from industry side of things, use some local workforce, and hopefully create some careers long-term to be able to, ultimately, when you're driving change within the community, it's those long-term stable revenue streams that will, you know, make differences in communities for both not only pocketbooks, but also for social change. So understanding that energy can be a means of providing that social change. So we're excited about those. While they are challenging, they will be, you know, they're stepping stones.
yeah, great answers. Since you mentioned period 4, I have there's a couple questions here on period 4. Do you know how the applications for people are being reviewed are going to be reviewed for period 4 to ensure that people are doing the work are actually Indigenous, and will IRC be involved in the review process?
So I guess I'll answer back that a little backwards. So in terms of is IRC involved in the review process, the answer is no. Ultimately, this is being still run by the government of Alberta. While we are the co-chairs of that Indigenous Steering Committee, what our input remains is ultimately looking at the program and the spirit and intent of it, and then figuring out how to best implement the policies and procedures that hit those targets of trying to have Indigenous involvement and really trying to promote industry and Indigenous relationships going forward. How do we build those on a positive note and have communities working from the in terms of applications and all of that? We're not involved with the review of those, and we are making recommendations in terms of how to vet companies. So one of the, there are those criteria of having that 50% on the executive team, or 50% Indigenous workforce, and so on and so forth. There is an opportunity for review by the government, the GOA, and they're doing their, they've got a number of great folks that are looking into those and ensuring. And realistically, Alberta's big, but it's not very big. It's everybody knows everybody. The patch is no different, and like it's folks knowing who's legit out there, and you would hope that folks are not only hitting those targets, but not trying to circumvent the process. When it comes to the patch, everybody knows everybody, but when it comes to First Nation communities, it's quite a bit smaller, and everyone knows everybody over there. So it's call up the cousin and go, hey, somebody's claiming to be from your nation and everything, and that can get it's not very hard to find those kind of things. You'd hope they won't happen, but it is what it is, and I think people are inherently good, and that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. One other question. How successful has IOGC and IRC been in engaging young adults in career in the oil and gas and environment sectors? Are there career creating economic benefits for the larger community when oil and gas activities occur?
Yeah, so I can't speak on behalf of IOGC just because I don't work there. But what I will say from IRC side of things is that, so as you see here, like in my background, I'm often in communities. Well, I do have an office. Well, we do have offices in Edmonton and Calgary. You'd be hard pressed to find me there. My goal is to be boots on the ground in those communities, to work with the community. Communities will often have their impact benefit agreements to employ their local workforce. What I do is not base myself around those impact benefit agreements, but go to community on a regular basis to ensure that we're both providing that interest in careers and energy, and then that training, employment, and business startups, and that mentorship. So really just working on that life cycle continuously. And I always, as much as I joke, I always tell communities that if I'm successful, that life cycle will take care of itself. And I'm hoping that in my time that, that I'd complete that life cycle and it'll just run with itself. I'd love one day to work myself out of a job, Joe, and not have to do that. So, I want to get there, and it's truly, that's what I'm about. I'm just passionate to see our communities involved in the energy sector, and to change a lot of the narratives, and to see that involvement and all of our industry and Indigenous communities and the government working together. So.
Well, great, Steve. Thanks for this. It's been a pleasure working with you and getting to know you over the last little while, and look forward to doing some other things with you. There's been talk of, with yourself and Stacy, our president, about maybe doing a couple roundtables with some members and getting involved and sharing some knowledge. So that'll be great going forward. I also encourage everyone to check out Steve on LinkedIn. He posts some really good stuff and shares a lot of interesting articles and stories, and it's very valuable. So I encourage everyone to check that out. So thanks again. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I think so we'll get back here about 10:15. No need to log out. Just you can stay on, go grab a coffee, take a nature break, and we'll come back at about 10:15, and we'll go on to our AAR presentation. So thank you, everyone. Adrian, if you're online, I'll switch over and get you set up.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. You should.
Oh, Joe, hi.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go. Okay,
Is Margot presenting with you or just you?
just me.
It's just me.
Okay.
Are you seeing my monitor now?
Yes, we are. Yep. Perfect.
Hey, Joe.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there, Joe. How are you doing?
Good. So we're running about 5 minutes ahead so far. It might be a little bit ahead.
Well, I'll fix that.
Yeah, you usually do. Good. So when it's your turn, we'll just do the switch and everything over, give you control.
Oh, is that right? So it just works? Okay. So how would I be watching other people right now, or can I, or how does that all work?
Can you see the screen that's up there right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just starting our next presentation in about a minute.
Oh, I see. And then I'll be watching that one.
We're on an early coffee break.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I was literally just going to start. So we'll come back to you for 11:30-ish.
11:30, yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
You bet. Thanks.
You ready, Adrian?
Sure.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a chance to grab a coffee, check your emails. Next up is Adrian Carey with the Alberta Energy Regulator to give us an update on contamination management and administration of the remediation regulations. So I'll turn it over to Adrian, and Peter, you can turn off your camera for now as well.
Oh, okay.
Great. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this morning. So thanks very much to Lars and Steve for some interesting presentations. So today I'm going to be presenting on contamination management, particularly AER administration of the remediation regulation. This presentation has been put together with myself and my colleague Margot. We're both members of the remediation and contamination team responsible for regulatory oversight of remediation and contamination management at upstream oil and gas sites across the province. We're based in Edmonton and Calgary, currently enjoying a balance of working from home and the office. So I'm going to be doing the talking today. So Margot's in Edmonton and I'm in Calgary, and we figured that it was safer just to keep the microphone at one end to avoid technical hitches. So the structure of the AER and where we sit within it, we're in the operations division, the regulatory applications branch, the oil and gas subsurface and waste and storage group, and then our team is in that group. So an overview of the presentation. So we'll provide a quick overview of the requirements under repair section 112 and the remediation regulation, how they tie together. We'll describe the AER expectations for remedial action plan content and how the record of site condition can tie into a remedial action plan submission. We'll briefly introduce a plan for addressing a backlog of pre-2019 substance releases that require submissions under the remediation regulation. And as well, we'll give a brief description of some of the upcoming activities of this team and the AER. So we've heard that additional information would be useful regarding the duties under EPIA 112, that's the duties to take remedial measures and when they are triggered, as well as the duties under the remediation regulation and when they are triggered, as well as how to efficiently demonstrate to the AER that these are being met. So the next four slides are going to review some key requirements and concepts. So it's the AER's mandate to ensure that companies operate in a safe, efficient, orderly and environmentally responsible manner, and this includes duties under the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act. So we'll briefly talk about a few of the key terms used in the legislation to set the context for the slides later in this presentation. Specifically, we'll look at EPIA, the Contaminated Sites Policy Framework, and the Remediation Regulation. So where are we with EPIA 112? The key components in the remediation regulation are based in EPIA section 112, the duty to take remedial measures, such as a release substance. So substance and release are defined in EPIA. In my mind, I have this sort of basically summarized as a chemical which is in a location that was not put there by nature. And we have may cause adverse effect or has the potential to cause an adverse effect. Adverse effect is defined in EPIA as the impairment of or damage to the environment, human health, safety or property. The person responsible in the first instance for the AER is the licensee. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the may cause and becoming aware in a few slides time, but basically how and when does a person find out about a released substance. Reasonable measures are defined in EPIA as the repairing, remedying, to confine the effects of the substance and to remediate, manage, remove, or otherwise dispose of the substance in such a manner as to prevent adverse effect or further adverse effect. Decisions regarding whether remedial measures are reasonable are partly based on the information that's submitted to the AER. Now to the Contaminated Sites Policy Framework. Very briefly, there's three policy outcomes here. There's pollution prevention, which is avoiding impairment or damage. The two places we work mainly under are the health protection, which is to take action that is commensurate to the risk, as well as returning the affected sites to productive use to encourage remediation. The Contaminated Sites Policy Framework sets and links the contamination management policy under EPIA 112 and for the related Government of Alberta or Alberta Environment and Parks guides and the environmental site assessment. So point one here, stakeholder roles and responsibilities. So the person responsible must assess the risk to the environment and when required, manage the contamination. Point two, the principles of contamination management. So section 3 of this Contaminated Sites Policy Framework states that the implementation of remedial measures involves key elements of the Alberta framework for the management of contaminated sites. These are source control, environmental site assessment, risk assessment, and contamination management, including remediation. Just to emphasize, a key point here is that remediation is one remedial measure which would sit alongside environmental site assessment and exposure control, etc. Going down to section 3.3 of the Contaminated Sites Policy Framework, the risk assessment section. This identifies that if substance is found greater than tier 1 guideline concentrations, then that shows there is potential for adverse effect. So therefore further assessment and or remediation might be necessary, and the duty to take remedial measures under EPIA 112 is triggered. It also states in the policy framework there that this does not preclude any other requirements or approval conditions that may already be in place. So the next slide here, getting on to the remediation regulation itself. So this presentation is about the remediation regulation. I just want to emphasize that if you need to report a release, then please refer to the release reporting section of the AER website for information about how to do that. So the remediation regulation was proclaimed on the 1st of January 2019 to replace the previous remediation certificate regulation. The remediation regulation Gives an ongoing reporting requirement, which sort of bridges the gap between initial release reporting and then information which has been submitted with closure applications, so usually rector applications. So it's just an important note here that APPEAR 112, the duty to take remedial measures and the duties under the remediation regulation apply across the life cycle and are not specific to the end of life. So one of the requirements in the REMREG is the reporting of new information about the impact of a released substance to a person or land. So this is in addition to the initial release reporting requirements and is an ongoing duty to report the new information to both an affected person and the director, which would be the AER in this case. New information does not necessarily have to be negative. Good news is also welcome. Like if a site was cleaned up, or if further assessment showed that remediation was not necessary, then that's also counts as new information. If in doubt, we encourage people to send the information into the AER. The second requirement would be where remediation will not be completed within 2 years of becoming aware of the substance release, there's a requirement for a remedial action plan. So we do acknowledge that 2019 plus 2 years, it was the first RAP, could be interpreted as being due on the 1st of January 2021. The AER is working to provide some clarity around what is going to be required. The regulation states that a person must remediate to the requirements of the Tier 1 guidelines, and they may opt to remediate in accordance with the Tier 2 guidelines, which provide the equivalent level of protection. The remediation regulation does not specify a timeline for the completion of remediation. It just specifies a timeline for the submission of a remedial action plan. So as long as the situation is not deteriorating, and that would be the source is controlled, risk and liability are not escalating, and the risk is managed, then operators would be encouraged to efficiently fulfill the obligations to remediate the site on a time frame that allows efficiency and economies of scale. And just to follow up, to round out what's in the REMREG, some of the new pieces. So the list of guidelines on the screen here are adopted under APPEAR section 38 and form part of the regulation, including any subsequent and future revisions and adoptions and such. The REMREG sets out standards for closure instruments for contaminated sites. These are limited remediation certificate, which is a sort of release-based closure, then a site-based remediation certificate, which should mean everything within a certain land area, as well as a sort of new instrument, Tier 2 compliance letters. This is for closure of contaminated sites where no remediation has taken place. And just another little note here, for the site-based remediation certificate and the Tier 2 compliance letter, which is also site-based, then a phase 1 environmental site assessment is required for those applications. So back to the idea of becomes aware as in APPEAR and when the duties to take remedial measures are triggered. Assessment for adverse effect is an ongoing process of diligence that can and should occur throughout the life cycle. So there are various ways a company can become aware of a substance release, and these are including, but not limited to, the examples that are on the screen here. So for instance, physically observing a substance release, such as oil on the ground surface or a berm overflowing. Perhaps a laboratory test that shows Tier 1 soil and groundwater remediation guideline exceedance, such as benzene concentrations in soil that may cause an adverse effect, or a guideline change, such as a new or revised, more stringent Tier 1 guideline value, which would cause a need to reevaluate existing information for evidence of potential adverse effect. These guideline change pieces don't apply to sites that have received a remediation certificate, and that certificate is specific to the substance at a certain concentration in a certain location. So what is a remedial action plan? When the regulation was published, there was some questions around what was actually required to fulfill these RAP submission requirements. Since then, in March 2020, Alberta Environment and Parks have issued their RAP guide, which is for sites within Alberta Environment and Parks jurisdiction. It clearly states in the earlier sections of this guide that activities regulated by the AER. There'll be information about how to submit remedial action plans for those and what the AER's requirements are. But they're very similar. So what is in a remedial action plan? A description of what is at the site, conditions and types and levels of contaminants. These would typically be in a conceptual site model. Description of how the release will be remediated. What are the proposed remedial measures? Are they further environmental site assessment, exposure control, and remediation? And when? What are the timelines for actions and milestones to assess progress, as well as when will remediation be completed? So hopefully it's clear that a remedial action plan is scalable based on multiple factors, including the time since discovery, the risk and magnitude and complexity of the site. So variously, you might have situations where a remedial action plan is along the lines of the vac truck's going to be here in 1 hour to recover free fluids from the surface, or perhaps a further environmental site assessment is going to be conducted this summer, or perhaps a comprehensive conceptual site model with a risk management and remedial action plan over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be put together. So these would all be remedial action plans, which may be acceptable from sort of one case to the next. So just here we're going to point out that the component pieces of a remedial action plan are contained within the AER record of site condition form, and this level of information could qualify as an acceptable remedial action plan in most cases, although we may request additional information at any time. We're going to follow up on this a bit more in a few slides' time. So a couple of instances where a remedial action plan is not required. So one is Section 2.2 sub 7 in the remediation regulation states that if the release was reported before January 2019, and that would be a release that has an AER incident or a file number, then the remediation regulation does not require a remedial action plan to be submitted unless otherwise requested by the AER. Just a note, for this exemption tile, the substance requiring remedial measures must match the substance in the release report. It's not just enough to have a release report tagged to a license. The impacts on the ground have to match the substance release report. The second bullet point here is just a pragmatic approach that the AER is taking, where sites that were essentially put to bed before the remediation regulation came into force. So if the previously unreported release has been properly assessed and where deemed necessary remediated, companies may defer submitting contamination management information until they submit a closure application. So that would be probably a reclamation certificate application. So important caveats here. Companies might be requested to submit professional reports and an AER record of site condition if the site is selected for an audit or if otherwise requested to do so. And the duty to report new information as it arises always apply. So if the state of the site changes, then companies must submit an appropriate report and a record of site condition at that time. So the AER REMREG implementation plan. There's been industry and stakeholder engagement on this. Basically, really, how is the AER going to implement the REMREG? So we've heard various concerns, such as the time and money needed for reporting low-risk sites that may be dealt with later hinders closure from taking place. People looking for clarity on when are the points of compliance with the regulation and how to demonstrate compliance. This would have become more clear since the regulation was enacted. There's concern about the volume of submissions required to meet the requirements and how these might divert time and resources from other efficient closure activities. General concerns about feasibility of completing all required site assessments across wide areas in a short time frame. And then just uncertainty around RAP content and that the creation and submission of acceptable remedial action plans is going to be onerous. We'll talk more about that in a couple of slides' time. What we also heard was that the industry is less concerned with complying with the REMREG with substance releases that are discovered from January 2019 onwards. What was more of a concern to industry was how to efficiently address unreported releases that were identified prior to 2019, and such require a remedial action plan to be submitted in order to comply with the REMREG. So I'm just going to speak a little now about why industry needs to provide information on remedial measures to the AER. It's to ensure that risk is adequately characterised and managed, such that public and environmental safety are ensured, to provide transparency and assurance to Albertans that companies are meeting their obligations to take remedial measures under repair, to enable the efficient delivery of risk-based regulatory oversight using the IDA approach. That's the integrated decision approach, which people see in the one-stop tool. And then to demonstrate efficient closure and liability reduction programs are in alignment with contamination management requirements under the remediation regulation. So as before, this doesn't have to be a bad news story. Good news is also welcome, and it would be very useful for the AER to start getting a better handle on how many sites with potential for adverse effect actually turned out to require remediation. So we need to recognise that the REMREG has created new requirements to provide remedial action plan information where, based on tier 1 exceedances, there may be an adverse effect, and that in the past, industry may not have provided information to AEP or the AER to demonstrate that acceptable remedial measures were being undertaken. So it's part of the AER's mandate for effective policy assurance that we are considering the time and effort industry needs in order to adjust its procedures and to meet these policy requirements. And just the last bullet point on the screen here, part of the implementation plan is for the AER to build out energy industry specific closure instruments for the remediation certificates and the tier 2 compliance letter, which are available under the remediation regulation. So the AER record of site condition form, this is picking up from 3 slides ago. It's a key part of the AER's implementation of the REMREG is what is achieved through the record of site condition. So the component pieces of the remedial action plan, the what, how, and when, are contained within the AER form. This level of information could qualify as a sufficient and acceptable RAP in most cases, although it may request additional information. The form went out in March 2019. It's on the website alongside a how-to document, which describes how to fill out the form. We see that this general technique of submitting structured data has benefits to industry and the AER. So the form is scalable. It can, for instance, include multiple substance releases that are being managed as part of one contaminated site. We fully expect efficiency to be increasing over time as we refine the one-stop system for submission of contamination management information. The IDA approach allows decisions to be made in a more timely fashion using structured data to assess the risk of the site. And then the other key purpose is to track the progress of the contaminated site from the sort of time of discovery through to closure, as per one of the main intents of the remediation regulation. Continued use of the form should allow the optimization of regulatory oversight and associated interim reporting requirements where possible. We'll continue to receive feedback on the use of this form, and we're always open to discussions, of course. So we just spoke previously about kind of exemptions from the regulation with sites that are properly reported before the regulation came into force, and sites that have been put to bed with the AER is not going to be requesting information right now. On the flip side to that is there are some pre-2019 releases that do require a remedial action plan submission in order to comply with the remediation regulation. So conversations with industry suggest this backlog is generally lower risk sites. The AER will need information on these sites in order for us to do our job and verify industry's opinions. It's a reasonable expectation of the AER that industry has this information because they would have used it to perform their evaluation of risk and also for prioritising, planning, meeting other regulatory obligations, times of due diligence, such as transactions and divestitures. We heard that a tool would be useful to make the submission of this data straightforward. And then same as we mentioned for the record of site condition form, the structured data within this tool, it really facilitates the risk-based and efficient regulatory oversight. So the approach for how to bring in these pre-2019 substance releases that require RAP submissions and achieve compliance with the REMREG. So the resolution of remedial action plan content and timelines for remedial action plan submission can be amended and appropriately scaled here. It's the AAR's preference that professional reports and remedial action plans, potentially in the record of site condition form, are on file, enabling the full use of IDA and paving the way to one-stop. However, given the volume of work and the time that this would take, it's considered a reasonable trade-off that these submissions will commence with a low-resolution submission. And the AAR has areas of flexibility with administering the remediation regulation. So this low-resolution submission would require enough information to facilitate a rudimentary risk triage and supply the basic required RAP components to achieve compliance with the reg. As before, industry should have this information on file. But the key part of this mechanism is that iterative update submissions will be made over time based on completion of the work, generation of new information, or perhaps AAR requests, until we do have a professional report and a RAP in a record of site condition on file. It's intended that this approach would enable regulatory oversight required by the REMREG while optimizing industry interaction with the AAR. From the regulatory oversight perspective, design and implementation of the IDA audit program is key to the feasibility and success of this approach. So just to reiterate all of that, the low resolution RAP submission option is being developed for pre-2019 unreported releases to facilitate REMREG compliance with submission on a reasonable timeline. But more engagement and information will follow on this in the short future. So what is, actually, excuse me, I'm just going to hang on the previous slide here. So I'm just going to do a quick summary of what was spoken about here. So remediation regulation is additional to the initial release reporting, where ongoing remedial measures are required. After 2 years from becoming aware of a substance release, a remedial action plan is required. While a Tier 1 exceedance triggers the need for remedial measures under APIA 112 and the REMREG, remedial action plans are scalable and commensurate with risk. Further environmental site assessment and remediation at the end of life, as long as risk is managed, will be an acceptable remedial action plan in some circumstances. In these instances, really completing and submitting a record of site condition form is not viewed as onerous, it's efficient. The licensee must undertake the remedial measures that they commit to on the timelines in the remedial action plan. We're coming up with a special plan to address the backlog of pre-2019 substance releases requiring a RAP in order to comply with the REMREG. And the AAR need this information to be submitted in order to fulfill our mandate to ensure companies operate in a safe, efficient, orderly and environmentally responsible manner. So what's next for this team? So alongside the pre-2019 low resolution submission plan for the backlog that we just spoke about, there's also been just recently some updates to the AAR website. If you go to the remediation tab under closure and the remediation regulation administration page, some of the information that's in this presentation is now also on the website. It goes through the applicability and requirements of the REMREG and how to demonstrate to the AAR that they're being met. We're also working on a contamination management manual. So this will not be introducing regulatory requirements. It is going to be a compendium of what those requirements are and what can be done, and what are the options for contamination management and closure of AAR regulated sites. So this will include information on assessment of risk using the Tier 2 approach and closure options as identified in the remediation regulation. And we are also working on putting the record of site condition into one stop, so further use of the IDA approach for contamination management. And this will include, as mentioned before, the build out of the contamination management audit program. So I just want to acknowledge it was challenging for us to get these concepts laid out in a linear fashion. So a little bit of sort of flicking backwards and forwards through the slides. So just appreciate the attention while we went through this material. People can sign up to receive updates via various parts of the AER website. And yeah, now it's time just to say thank you very much for your time. And are there any questions?
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate that. Do we have any questions for Adrian and AER? Yes, the presentations will be available via the video, and they'll be posted later. I'm just going to look through the questions here. Give me a second. Is there a separate remediation certificate application and required in addition to the reclamation certificate if one is seeking a certificate, or is a certificate inherently provided since the requirements to remediate would need to be fulfilled prior to issuing the certificate?
Right, you don't have to have a remediation certificate in place in order to apply for a reclamation certificate. The concepts here are around closure. There's two types of closure. One is administrative closure and one is regulatory closure. The closure available under a reclamation certificate, as I understand it, provides administrative closure for the contamination. So the licensee will retain liability for that contamination should adverse effect manifest itself in the future. But under a remediation certificate, as long as in particular the substance, location, concentration, etc., that provides closure over time in that regulatory closure.
Okay. Is AER going to explore additional closure instruments options, i.e. approval of no further action for sites which obtaining a certificate is not feasible based on the current regulatory framework?
So the AER administers policy and regulatory requirements rather than sets them in this space under Part 5 of EPIR. The Tier 2 compliance letter goes some way towards answering this question, I think. Okay. But what is in policy, I should just add, if a site is under risk management, then it's not eligible for closure.
Okay. Does the table that we were all required to send to your group at the end of 2018 not cover off the rudimentary risk triage component you mentioned for pre-2019 releases?
A remedial action plan requires a description of the state of the site as well as the plan for managing it. So we don't have a mechanism for linking a fresh submission back to that submission from 2018. Aside from that, we envisage that the state of a site will change. So a fresh submission will be required because of that. Also, it's about resolution. What we learned from the 2018 submission, which we obviously appreciate the effort that people put into that, but it was really helped us develop techniques for receiving and appraising structured data. It paved the way to the record of site condition form, and this low resolution submission for pre-2019 submissions that we're talking about is going to feed back into the record of site condition submission. So having consistency of the structured data is important there.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Okay. Does the AER follow up with the owner to ensure that the 2-year timeframe commitments have been met? And is there a penalty if the 2-year closure is not obtained?
So let's just tease that apart a little bit. The onus is on the person responsible to submit the remedial action plan within 2 years of becoming aware. Yes, in the future, tracking systems will be developed to have a better handle on how these timelines are running. The reference to closure, the remediation regulation does not specify a timeline towards submitting a remedial action plan, and that plan must itself give an indication of how and when the site's going to be closed.
Okay.
And that will be tracked, yes.
Okay. Is AAR considering risk management plans in addition to RAP?
So a remedial action plan, if we go through the list of what the remedial measures are as per the Contaminated Sites Policy Framework, it's contamination management, including remediation. So it's difficult to give a completely straight answer because of the array of scales that will be required here. Like a one size fits all to like a little bit of sort of minor cleanup in a well centre versus the long-term management of a historic gas plant are different. But essentially, the plan to manage the risk can be incorporated in the remedial action plan.
Okay, we'll do a couple more if you don't mind. Do you expect a low resolution submission tool for the pre-2019 releases that require remedial action plan to be available by the end of 2020?
That would be the plan.
Okay. Has industry started to comply by reporting historical releases with the REM regulation? And has there been issued specific guidance to industry on how to do so per your slides? Low resolution versus RAP.
So do you mind saying that one again, please, Joe?
Sorry. Has industry started to comply by reporting historical releases with remediation regulation? And has there been issued specific guidance to industry on how to do so as per the slides?
Yep, so there's guidance about how to submit a record of site condition form, which is on the AER website. The first remedial action plan that would be due following the issuance of the remediation regulation would be the 1st of January 2021. So we have not seen a huge influx of submissions that way, but companies continue to report their contamination management to the AER.
Okay. Does the AER really expect operators of an EPA approved facility to report within 7 days with changes to groundwater quality? What is the definition of change? 50-year-old facilities may include many components that exceed Tier 1. So where there is a Tier 1 exceedance, there is a duty to manage that exceedance according to the remediation regulation. Took care to say that the requirements do not preclude any of the pre-existing requirements that are in approvals and such. The record of site condition is a scalable form. It is designed to be able to handle the simple to the complex. Okay. One more. How often is the record of site condition required to be updated?
Well, it sort of ties in with the previous question a little bit. It's as new information is generated. So if the site is behaving exactly as you expect it to behave over a period of years, then that would be when the next submission would be due. We laid out a couple of moments, perhaps in the speaking notes there, but if the work is done, which is described in the remedial action plan, or new information is generated, so fresh information that changes the understanding about the site, or the AER might request an update, would be the time when a new record of site condition should be submitted. But these forms are set to accompany the professional reports and provide a summary of what's contained in the report and the plan for managing the site, but using this structured data such that this IDA approach to regulatory oversight can be applied.
Okay, I think that's enough questions for today. Thank you again, Adrian, for your time and agreeing to do this for us. Really appreciate it. Hopefully the next time we can do this in person. So
that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Thank you again. And We'll now switch over to our next presentation. I'm going to switch control here to Martine. Just give me a second. So next up, we have Martine Lalonde from an environmental specialist with Public Services and Procurement Canada, and Jeffrey Yakimchuk with CERDAC, and I believe there might be one other individual co-presenting with them, and they're going to give us an update on the Canadian Federal Contaminated Site Cleanup Program.
Sounds good. Everybody can hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen. I'll turn it over. I'll come back for questions.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. As Steve Saddleback said earlier, I just want to, before starting my presentation, just want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm currently from Ottawa, so I'm on the unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and I invite you to take a moment to reflect on where you are today, listening to this presentation. As Joe mentioned, so I'm joined with two of my colleagues. So it's Jeffrey Yakimchuk, which is the social policy analyst with the Northern Affairs, with the Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada, and also my colleague Ileana Ahrens, which is a physical science officer with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Just over here, a little overview of our my presentation. There's a lot of stuff to cover, but
sorry to interrupt. Adrian, I think your mic is still on. So if we could get that turned off, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Sounds good. So there's an overview of what we're going to cover today. Before going in the deep of our subject, I just want to see if we can try to do a poll. We'll try with GoToWebinar, so I'll need your help, Joe. I have a backup. If it doesn't work, we'll use Slido, but let's see if it works with the platform we're using today.
All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to try this. We haven't done this before, so something new we're doing. So let's try this. Everyone can hopefully can see the poll.
And the reason I'm asking this question is I'll be able to tailor my presentation a bit more of depending what kind of company you work for.
Okay, we'll give everyone a few seconds to vote. So, Martine, can you see the results or no?
I can't for some reason.
You can't? Okay. So right now, so far, it's 41% consultant, 8% contractor, and 52% other.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Perfect. Then I'll be able to speak to you a bit more as we move along, things that may be pertinent to each of the groups. I'm going to start at the beginning. So I'm going to talk about the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan, so FCSAP. So what is FCSAP? Is a program that has two main objectives. The first one is to reduce the risk to the human health and the environment, and at the same time to reduce the associated environmental liabilities from our sites. And which sites is available or eligible to that program is all sites are federal, so either owned or leased by the federal, and as well, like it could be non-federal sites that we as a government of Canada accepted responsibility for them. This program has been running for 15 years. As you can see, we touch about over 2,000 sites in terms of remediation activities, and we fully remediated 1,700 of them. As part of that program, we have other secondary benefits. So it's there's job creation, and as well the development of science. So we have about 88 environmental quality guidelines, technical guidance tools that has been developed by, as part of that program. Some are internal to us, but some are available as well to anybody who would be interested to look at them. Here is a graph to show you. So I just want to make a distinction. So we have the Federal Contaminated Inventory. So it's a database available to the public as well. So it includes any federal sites. And at the moment, we have about 24,000 sites on it. and a subset of them are funded by the Federal Contaminants Action Plan. I think it's about 3,000 of them. So as you can see, pre-FICSAP, so before our program in 2005, we thought we hadn't handled how many sites we have, and then when we start assessing, we realize we have way more sites that need attention than we were thinking. And then you can see they kind of plateau, and around 2010-11, that's when we start like the trend of like we are able to assess, remediate the sites, and then close them off. And as you can see, the last year, so as of March 2020, about 72% of our inventory is closed sites. About 20 of them still remain needs actions on them, and 8% of them are suspected, meaning like we have a suspicion that the site is impacted, but we haven't confirmed it yet. What are the sites under FICSAP? So I could describe long and large, but I thought picture kind of speaks better. So we have a diversity of sites. So as you can see, we have some marine sites that need dredging. We have current or former military base. We have sites that are remote, so it's or difficult to access. We have sites in conservation areas, and we have sites on reserves or nearby indigenous community. We have sites also on permafrost. Anyway, so we have office buildings, we have a whole slew of sites to assess and remediate. We're happy that our program has been renewed for another 15 years. Yay! So as of April 2020, just this April, we start the phase 4 of our program, which is 5 years. And so the program has been renewed for 15, but we have the funding confirmed for the next 5 years. And in terms of funding, they're separate in 2 main envelopes. So we have about $35 million for assessment activities, and we have $1.2 billion for remediation, risk management, and long-term monitoring. That program, if you're not aware of, is about 18 custodians. So there's 18 different federal department or crown corporation that consist of the program. It's a horizontal initiative, and we have a dual secretariat. So we have Environment and Climate Change Canada and Treasury Board Secretariat. We have another program, another federal program, which is a brand new one. It's called the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program. And that program just started at the same time. So April 2020 just started. It's a 15-year program as well. It's $2.2 billion over that span of time. And it's really to assess the 8 largest abandoned mine remediation project from Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada. So as you can see on that slide, the 8 mines are divided between the Yukon and the Northwest Territory. So there's 5 in the Yukon and 3 in the Northwest Territories. I don't have the time to go over the 8 mines or sites, but I'm just going to focus on the 3 located in the Northwest Territory. So the first one is Giant Mine, which is a former gold mine, really close by the city of Yellowknife. So there's remediation required for and containment of highly toxic arsenic trioxide waste. There's removal buildings required, and also tailing ponds. The remediation is expected to commence or to begin in 2022 and will last approximately 8 to 10 years. The other site that we have is Kentug Mine that was active until November 2015. Then the ownership reverted back to us, the government of Canada. Since then, it's extensive assessment, remediation, and was occur in order to determine the liability. And also our intent is to sell this property because there's still minerals in the ground, there's still viable infrastructures. The other sites that we have is the Great Bear Lake project. So it's an agglomeration of sites, so it's not just one, it's a few of them, and it was active from the 1930s to mid-1980s. The minerals were silver and copper, bismuth and uranium. Yeah, and we're planning to, so we have different stakeholders as part of that project, and it will take a few years to remediate as well. I just want to mention here on the pictures on the right, you can see it's part of the project that was done, I think it's a year or two ago, and it's about 950 drum barrels that was removed from the site. And then we have time for another poll question.
Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. So, Martine, we got 100% in the prairies, 22% in the north, 40% BC, 21% Ontario and Quebec, and 12% Atlantic Canada.
Okay, excellent. Oh, okay. Oops, something happened on my screen. Just a minute. Okay, that'll be perfect. So I just want to let you know that in today's presentation, what we'll focus mainly on the prairies, and we're going to touch about the north of Canada. If you're interested for British Columbia, I know we have another event with the BC Bass Conference in the 3rd week of October, which we're going to focus on that region in terms of the Federal Contaminants Action Plan. And as well, we're gonna have two other sessions, one in French and one in English, the 1st week of October with the Real Property Institute of Canada. So all the events are virtual. The one in the 1st week of October will be free if you want to attend, and we'll be able to focus on different parts of Canada. But today I'll focus on prairies and the north. Okay, this slide, lots of text, but what I want to tell you is we try to give you the best information that we have. As everybody that did project management before, things change. I don't want to say constantly, but change often. So what I have today is the best information that we have. We try to give you, we try to update the information at least twice a year, mostly in January and July. But if there's major change throughout the year, we'll be able to provide that information to you as well. We have a full report on our, it's called a GC Collab group. So it's a federally created website. It's a collaborative platform. Anybody can access, and you just have to request. You just have to create an account and request a membership. So if you want the full report with all the analysis, that's where you go. That's the link below. If you have any issue to access, just contact me. I'll be happy to help you get it. Things change, as you know. It can be weather condition or a global pandemic. So I just want to let you know that they're all planning, they're all our work plans, but things can change as things move along. Okay, in terms of numbers, so what I wanted to show you on this slide is how much funding has been assigned between the two programs. So we have the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan, a Northern Embedded Mines Reclamation Program. So as you can see, there's a lot of funding associated in the next 5 years. We have an average of like $225,000 for the embedded mine program, and about 250,000, I would say million for the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan. So all to say that a lot of funding, a lot of activity will happen, and we'll need your help to achieve our objectives. For the Northern Embedded Mine Reclamation Program, I just wanted to show you the division of where the funding has been assigned between the Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territory. So as you can see, in the Yukon, it's about 125 million on average, and for the Northwest Territory, it's about 105 million on average. Here, a lot of numbers, a lot of graphs. The main message I want to portray here is nationally, this is where the funding looks like, in a sense that most of our funding are remediation, long-term monitoring, risk assessment funding. So really the focus on for phase 4, our program is really to assess, to remediate sites that we know of and close them off. You can see at the bottom right is all the custodians involved in that program. So I know there's a lot of acronyms, but you can see the one with the most funding are National Defense. We have Indigenous Services Canada. We have Transport Canada. We have Crown Indigenous Relations Northern Affairs. And I think we're there as well, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and the Fisheries and Ocean as well. Just if you're not aware of that distinction, so we have Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs that take care of the sites north of the 60th parallel, while Indigenous Services Canada take care of sites that are south of the 60th parallel and mostly on First Nation reserves or nearby Indigenous community. In terms of funding, you can see in the circle on the left that most of the funding will be spent in British Columbia, Ontario, and north of Canada. In terms of the prairies, which include Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, it's the same trend as we see. So mostly remediation, long-term monitoring funding. The main custodians in this area is National Defense and Indigenous Services Canada, and most of the funding will be spent in Manitoba. This slide is to show you a bit more, to give you an idea of the range or the size of the sites funding-wise. If you see on the left, it's our assessment sites. So you can see that most of them will be under $250,000. And in terms of assessment, most of them, I think it's about 80% of them will be under $1 million. But we still have about 31 sites that are over $1 million. That slide, what I wanted to, the message I want to convey to you is there's different procurement providers. So there's different ways the work is being procured. And in prairies, the main procurement provider is through Defense Construction Canada. So they are a procurement provider to the National Defense. There's also Indigenous Services Canada. The way the money is funneled, it goes directly to the First Nation, and the First Nation is doing the contracting. Other mechanism is through my department, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and some departments are doing their own procurement. And I have a full slide on procurement approaches. We'll be able to dig a bit further, but I just want to show you this is the main 4 mechanisms or approaches usually when it comes to procurement. Now we can focus in the north. In the north, in this slide, it kind of includes the Northwest Territory, Nunavut, and Yukon. Same trend again. Most of the funding are remediation, risk assessment, long-term monitoring funding, and a bit of assessment. The main custodians in the north are CERNA, we have National Defense, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Parks, and Transport Canada. And most of the funding is directed to the Northwest Territory. In terms of distribution of range, we only have 2 assessment sites, so it's at the either end of the spectrum. So one site is under 250,000 and one site is like 3.6 million. So all or nothing, I guess, at this point. In terms of remediation, we talk about 78% of the sites are below $1 million, but we still talk about 28 sites that are over $1 million. In terms of procurement providers, the picture looks a bit different in the north. Most of them will be procured through Public Services and Procurement Canada when it comes to assessment and remediation, and a bit of Defense Construction Canada, and some custodians are doing their own procurement internally. Oh, okay. So I'm done with the numbers for now. I just want to show you this tool. So this is a tool we created. It's newly created at the beginning of the year. You may or may not have seen it yet, but I'll see if I can try to switch my screen. Is everybody seeing this one now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what you do is the link is on the on the presentation, you just click on it. You don't need an account. It goes straight to that tool. And what it does, it's visually showing you where the fixed sites are, as well as the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program site. So you have a dashboard on the side that kind of take data from what you see on the right. There's different options. So if you want to see, I want to see site in Alberta, then it brought you exactly where you need to be. We have here different view. If you want to put the treaty as well, it kind of adds some layers. You can change the type of topography you want, if you want more like the streets and stuff. And at the same time too, you can do some research. So let's say I want to see giant mine. Then you click and it brought you exactly to that site. And then what you can see, it kind of gives you some information. So the federal containment sites inventory number, it gives you the custodian, what kind of class it is. I'll try another one that gives you a bit more data. We'll go back maybe near Edmonton. Here, so you can click and it brought you exactly to the other federal contaminant sites inventory. It gives you as well, if you click on the arrows, what kind of contaminants it is, the media that is impacted, and stuff like that. So we hope to add more information as the program is moving along on the different sites, and then it kind of gives you a dashboard as well. Let's go back. Oh, for this tool, we have a user manual that is on our GC Collab website or group. So I'll be able to show you a bit later. Actually, maybe I can do it now. Let's do it now. Where was I? Okay, so here is our GC Collab website. What you have to do is request a membership, or request create an account, and then you can request membership to the group, and then you can have the latest activity, which I posted today's presentation to it. You can go see what are the different files. So we have the full report of the demand forecast on it. We have the user manual, and then you have more. You have also upcoming events over here. So we have the presentation at best is already on it, and then we'll be adding more and more and more to it. Oops. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so one slide that probably is of interest of all, some of you, is how to do business with us. So generally, when it comes to public services and procurement Canada and Defense Construction Canada, the way we procure work is when it's low dollar value, we usually use our established standard procurement tool. So it can be standing offer, task authorization, supply arrangement. So to get, and then on these tools, they're usually 4 to 6 qualified firms, and these tools are good for 3 to 5 years. And then we can have them renewed. So when they need to be renewed, they're posted on either buy and sell or Mercs, and then company can do a proposal, and then we assess them, and then we qualify firms. And then usually it's on a rotational basis. So when we have a site that we need, then we have this firm, the next one that needs work, and then the work is assigned to that company. In the prairies in the north, our consulting tools consulting services tools are expiring in March 2022. So that means I would say to look into buy and sell and Mercs about 6 to 8 months prior to the expiry date, and that's when we try to renew the tool, because we want to avoid gaps into it. When it comes to higher dollar value or more complex sites, they're individual tender and they're advertised on buy and sell and Mercs. I'd say if you're not familiar with buy and sell, then go browse through it. There's a wealth of information on that, not just like upcoming tenders, but there's clauses, there are reference documents, there's how to do business with us. I really highly recommend that you go and look into that website. I forgot to mention that in the north, we're really happy. We have a new tool. It's called a supply arrangement, but instead of for consulting firm, it's for contractors and to do remediation activities. And that the beauty with that tool is it always remain open. So the posting is open. You can submit a proposal at any time, and then frequently PSPC will go through it and qualify it and add qualified firm to the list of qualified suppliers. So when there is an opportunity coming up, then you'll be able to have access to them. In terms of individual posting, what I can tell you at this moment is there's one coming up, I would say, over the winter, so keep your eyes open for that. It's from the Mobay, it's Mobay remediation project, which is a former high Arctic weather station. So we'll look into remediation of PHCs in the soil, removal of lead in paint, and demolition of sub-buildings. So we talk about like a multi-million-dollar project, and it's located in one of the remote, most isolated site in Canada. So not impossible to go to, but it takes a bit of logistic. The other way you can access these opportunities is through individual First Nation or tribal council. They may put out the requests for bidders for assessing and remediating activities on their land. I just want to tell you quickly that housed within Public Services and Procurement Canada, there's the Office of Small and Medium Enterprise. So they do training, they do assist company. They have offices across Canada. In the contact information slide a bit later on in this presentation, I put the contact information for the Western region, but if ever you want to contact another office, just let me know and I'll provide you with the information. Okay, so I give you a lot of information out, but I still want feedback from you. So there's areas that we think the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan is 15 years old. We have another 15 years to go. So there's areas that we know we could do better. And I listed them, the one that kind of comes to our mind like quickly. And some is we want to increase Indigenous engagement and opportunity. We want to be able to use innovative and sustainable technology on sites and on our contract, which is not always easy. We want to increase opportunity to small and medium enterprise, and we want to include climate change resiliency on federal contaminated sites. In terms of next step, what we're looking is kind of to adjust to the pandemic challenge. So there's all these restrictions on travel and how to do field work. I know some consulting firms are really creative. They rent RVs, they put their field crew on it, isolate them for 2 weeks. So that way they don't have to go in the hotel and groceries or restaurants and stuff. And we keep an eye open for how the second wave will behave, how big it will be. That's what we're looking at it right now. I do want to mention that there's talks about some potential stimulus initiatives or packages. So our program is, I think it's a suitable program to kind of have an influx of funds to it. So it will be like a program similar to the one about 10 years ago, the Economic Action Plan. At this point, I wish I had the information. I don't. I'm not privy to that kind of conversation, unfortunately. But if ever we have an influx of funds, then I'll update the GC Collab group. I'll make sure to do another presentation. We'll let you know how and where and which sites are affected. Yeah, so I talked about improvement. So I would like to ask you like right away, what do you think is areas you think we should improve as the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan?
And you can click more than one option on these, and they partly got cut off. So the first one is better integration of climate change resiliency and adaptation measures. The second one's more opportunity for the use of innovation and or green technology on sites. And then more opportunities for Indigenous communities and or business, more regular communication with the private sector and other. So Martine, we got 7% for the first option, better integration of climate change and resiliency. 19% for more opportunities for the use of innovative technologies. 19% for more opportunities for the Indigenous community and other businesses, and 42% more regular communication with the private sector, and 10% for others.
Excellent. Oh, that's exciting results. I'm glad that I was able to get you feedback right away. At any point, it could be during this forum or it could be after the fact. Just contact me and I'll be happy to hear what are your ideas or solutions or feedback on these issues. In terms of more regular communication with the private sector, I think one easier option at this point is if you want to join our GC Collab group, and that way you kind of get information on a regular basis. Here's the contact information. So we have Environment Climate Change Canada, which is one of the 6 step secretariat. There's the Federal Condemned Sites website, if you're not already aware of it. We have a contact information at Crown Indigenous Relations Northern Affairs. Within my department, PSPC, we have our regional contact, Edward Damagen, that maybe some of you already know him. Otherwise, you can contact me at any time. Our Office of Small and Medium Enterprise information is there, and I highly suggest if you can subscribe to the news section of Buy and Sell. It kind of give you little articles here and there on what's happening on the website. I added a slide here, how to access GC Collab. So if you don't have a federal government email address, there's 2 ways you can create your account. You can either submit a ticket to the GC Collab help desk, or you can contact me and I'll invite you personally to the group. Questions, but just quickly, I just want to say, I won't go through it because in interest of time, but we have 2 annexes I added for distribution of site nationally and procurement provider if you're interested on more like a national overview. So I think we have a few minutes. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have any questions for me or one of my colleagues, Jeffrey and Eliana.
Thanks, Martine. And yeah, please, if we have questions for our federal friends, please fire them over and I will ask. What is the mechanism for the federal government to take responsibilities for mine sites and not the territories? Alberta gets a lot of grief about orphan well sites, but it seems like no one brings up mining.
Okay, I'm just writing some notes. Eliana, I know it's kind of fall under more eligibility criteria for federal contaminated sites action plan. Do you want to take a first crack at it?
Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, what is the mechanism for the federal government to take responsibility for mine sites? Alberta gets a lot of grief about orphan well sites, but there seems to no one brings up mining operations.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a specific eligibility criteria to qualify as a federal contaminated site. So as Martin explained, it would have to be on federal lands or on lands that the government has accepted responsibility for. There's also a shared responsibility contaminated site program as well, where if we're partly responsible, we could, you know, help with part of the funding as well. So there's more information about that on our website, and I could also, if you'd like, elaborate a bit more on our eligibility criteria in detail through contact information if you'd like.
Okay. Martine, can you send me an email as well with the website link for the collaboration site so that I can include it in the email that I send out to people?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, we have a couple minutes here, or no? Okay, great. Thanks for the presentation. Very much appreciate it. And we'll share the information that you shared. We'll share it with everyone who's attended, and I'll also I'll put information about the collaborative site in our newsletter out to industry as well. Okay, well, thank you again, and we'll move to our last presentation before our lunch break. Thank you again, guys.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Peter, you should have a message on your screen to share your desktop.
All right. And what are you seeing now?
Just a second. My computer's decided. Okay, we got your presentation. So it's kind of a last minute add to the agenda. Good friend of ESA and done a number of presentations over the years for us. So glad to have him back as the chair of the Natural Resources Conservation Board, NRCB. Peter Wolischin is going to give us an update. Some of it you may have heard before, and then some updates on hopefully some other stuff that they're working on. So Peter, I'll turn it over to you and then I'll come back for questions.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Now I need to minimize this screen, I guess, so I can see my slides. Is that all right? Okay, so can you see the intro slide here? Is that working?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity, Joe. I really appreciate it. It's been, as you pointed out, a number of years since I spoke at ESAA. So there are some duplicative slides because not a lot of people are real familiar with the NRCB. So I'll try to give you a bit of an idea of our two mandates and then a project update, both in terms of some AOPA work that we're doing on agriculture and then natural resource projects. Now, is this working? Yeah, so since we last spoke, we report through to the Environment Minister, Alberta Environment, Minister Nixon, and along with the Environmental Appeals Board. Last time we met, we also had the Land Compensation Board and Surface Rights Board, of which you folks would know for sure. However, since the last time we talked, those two boards have been merged under the Municipal Government Board and moved over to Municipal Affairs, so they're no longer with AEP. In terms of our org chart, as I said, we report to the Minister of Environment under an MOU. Some time ago, the board was reconstructed essentially from a governance perspective, and a CEO was added in the previous to 2006. The board sort of did the management of operations, which included regulatory work under EOPA and appellant work or quasi-judicial tribunal work. And that model really didn't work as well as other boards that were set up with a separate regulatory function and operations and then a board. So I joined as CEO way back in 2006 and became chair in beginning of 2018. We are currently recruiting for a board member, Paige Stewart, who is a longtime livestock person, beef livestock person. She worked with industry for a number of years. She joined our board 3 years ago, and we're now recruiting for a board member. I'm hearing that we may hear sometime later this month. Right now, we also have acting board members, Keith Leggett, who many of you may know, who used to be with Alberta Environment, is one of those acting board members. Because we're a tribunal, we need 3 people for a sitting panel, so and from a governance perspective as well. So obviously, we'll need to fill that spot. You know, this is a slide that's been, it's been around, and the message has been around, but kind of interesting. I mean, we get this a lot, even managing and regulating agriculture in terms of the potential risk and is there really issues with groundwater, with lagoons, that sort of thing. And this message has been resonating with a lot of folks in terms of just doing the right thing for the right reason. And rather than just debating the science, the climate scientists, why not make the world better? Not a bad thing to do. And of course, if we don't all buy in, the problem with this is some countries buy in and say, well, let's do the right thing. And you may not be competitive if your other competing countries don't also take the same view. But I always found this kind of cute in terms of, what if it is a hoax? Geez, we create a better world for nothing. Well, what the heck, create a better world for our kids and grandkids. But in the NRCB, we've got 2 mandates. One is AOPA, which is the Ag Operation Practices Act, and there we regulate the intensive livestock operations throughout the entire province. And then the Natural Resources Conservation Board Act, which is non-energy resource development. So we're the really tiny cousin to the AER. So of course the AER was on earlier, and you folks deal a lot with the AER in terms of the carbon energy footprint in Alberta, oil and gas. We do non-energy resource development. I'll talk about that in a minute, but just first quick overview of AOPA, which is our ag side. And that's the side of the business that we provide on the boots or on the ground, boots on the ground regulatory function in terms of issuing approvals for large livestock operation, and also compliance. So prior to 02, municipalities had this function through their own permitting processes, but it was sort of all over the map. Some had the resources and were able to regulate well. Others did not. In many cases, councils were put at odds with the public, their constituents, in terms of approving a large livestock operation when they had a big public pushback and it became political. So the province, to improve the siting and the environmental controls on livestock, created the Ag Operation Practices Act, and then gave it to our board, the NRCB, to regulate, because it was seen that, you know, Alberta Agriculture, who created the legislation, would, and also an advocate of industry, would likely not be an appropriate regulator, an arm's length regulator. So they gave it to the NRCB, and it's been working well. It had, you know, we had some bumps along the way for sure. Farmers have, prior to 02, were not regulated on a provincial statute. They are, as you, many have either come from farms or no farmers. I mean, they are strong-willed entrepreneurs. I came from a farm myself, and my dad was the same way. So there were some bumps on the road in terms of regulating an industry that had not previously been regulated. But, you know, I think we've got that ship righted. There's some trust built, and you know, from our perspective at least, I think it's working relatively well. And just a quick overview on agriculture in the province. This is an image that, you know, many of you have seen, I'm sure, on TV from industry associations, and it is iconic. It is the way, you know, cow-calf operations are run on the prairies and in Alberta, including the foothills, the mountains. It's beautiful, but that's stage one of production for beef. Stage two, of course, is getting them into feedlots for fattening, and then on to processors. And, you know, often we don't see those images because, you know, they're not as iconic, they're not as sexy perhaps. But what's interesting is the board really does very little in terms of regulating this aspect of the beef industry, other than seasonal feeding and bedding sites that are along creeks and that sort of thing. But essentially, the cow-calf industry is unregulated. I think for good reason. It's relatively low risk. But we do often get, you know, complaints about cattle and water and this sort of thing. And we can do some things about that, but it's really a kind of a joint responsibility with us and the environment. Whereas when it gets to the feedlot like this, that is the type of operations that we permit and we hold to account in terms of the regulations on our compliance end. And, you know, you've been hearing a lot about cattle during COVID because we've had some significant shutdowns of processing. And when it shuts down Alberta, it shuts down Canada almost, and we have 70% roughly of the total Canadian cattle. We feed, you know, we're the biggest feeder by a long ways in terms of finishing cattle. And when things happen in either cattle feedlots or in the plants, and we've got the two biggest plants in Canada, JBS and Cargill, the other one is in Ontario. But we process 70% of total Canadian beef. So during COVID, when we had some outbreaks in these plants and the plants had to shut down, I mean, it was a real issue, both in terms of, you know, access to product for consumers, of course, and including export markets, but also, you know, in terms of the livelihoods of those people that were impacted. And then you go back to the farm, and those cattle had nowhere to go. So they were backed up into feedlots, which backed up the cow-calf side as well, and it created, you know, a lot of angst in the industry, and some programs were developed to deal with it. Poultry as well is also regulated. These pictures sometimes surprise people. I mean, we have big barns in Alberta and across Canada as well. Poultry and dairy, I'll show next, are supply managed as opposed to sort of free market, and those are long-standing it was a long-standing system of production in Canada and is under fire a lot and under free trade agreements, of course, and when trade negotiations come up. But you know, I can tell you that these production systems are extremely efficient. They're clean. They monitor disease. When things happen, they know where they happen, and we can pinpoint and isolate barns, as opposed to what happens in some countries. And you know, China is one of those examples of where, for hog production, for instance, I mean, there are a lot of hogs on land, small herds, up down to even 1, 2, 3 sows. And when there are disease issues, those issues spread quickly and they're extremely hard to control. So from, I guess, my perspective in food production, I would say that the way we produce food, both in terms of on-farm and processing, you know, is second to none in the world. Our food is safe, and we can trust it. This is just a typical hog operation. So our big industries are poultry, beef, and hogs, of course, and then we've got sheep and lamb and others as well. But, it is modernized, it's mechanized. Here is a free run, not a free range, but an inside barn free run operation down here. So the birds can move around. They're not just caged as they once were, and this is becoming basically industry standard. And the eggs are taken out of here all automatically through belts and then processed right into the crates here. I'll just run a quick demo here so you can see how that works. But these eggs on the top here are actually being taken out from their pens here, or the cages here, and then directly down to the down below. So it's both a grower and a retailer, essentially. Extremely clean, extremely efficient, well run, and part of the reason our food is relatively inexpensive. So what are the issues in terms of managing agriculture from an environmental perspective? Largely it is manure, and it is either groundwater. So these are earthen manure storage systems, similar to municipal waste systems, I suppose. Above ground liquid, which is kind of the Cadillac, but not used as often because of cost. Most of them are compacted clay, but depending on soil conditions, and you folks would deal with this, of course, many of them are synthetically lined. So on farms, it's either groundwater worries or surface water. Here's a couple of examples of, you know, when things can potentially go bad. And you can see cattle standing in essentially manure contaminated runoff off the farm. This is a typical spreading sort of a photo. I suppose you see this if you're traveling southern Alberta in spring and fall, which are typically the manure spreading times. But of course, this is all great for the soil if managed correctly, and it isn't running off. So there's regulations around that, but the NRCB is there for essentially setting those guidelines and also ensuring that there's compliance with the guidelines to protect both groundwater and surface water. I'll jump over that. So on our Natural Resource Conservation Board Act side, I mentioned some of the projects that we were involved in. We do not do oil and gas, as I mentioned, but we have water management, forest secondary industries like pulp mills, some of the metallic and industrial minerals, recreation and tourism. So Three Sisters was one of the early projects that were put in front of the NRCB back in 1991. And then specific projects referred to by cabinet. So if there's an issue, they're having a lot of public contention and they'd like an independent board to look at something, cabinet can just say, NRCB, you can hold a hearing and make a public interest decision on this project. And we've had a number of those as well. So recent projects for us, Cougar Creek, debris flood retention dam, and I'll show a few slides of that. We are currently dealing with the Springbank offstream dry dam or dry reservoir, and I've got some slides on that as well. And then some of our pending projects are listed there. And interestingly, you may have heard on the news, so once again, and on the coast, they had the gondola cable cut. That's becoming, you know, we don't know if that's what sort of gearing that is, if that's an environmental movement that is doing something like that. I mean, it's just terrible, but there is a very large scale proposed gondola project for Canmore that will go up Lady McDonald. We'll see in terms of when we get to that hearing, what sort of, I guess, potentially pushback we get on a gondola project. But in terms of flood mitigation, you know, these are quickly some images from 13 that you remember. It's taken a while, I think, in my view, too long to get a response to some of the flood mitigation that we need. These are images from Calgary. Horrific, of course. This is just outside towards High River. So the devastation was huge. This is an aerial from Kananaskis, and they rebuilt that course, that golf course. I had the pleasure to play that this summer, and they've done a marvelous job. But it was devastated from that 213 flood. So the Springbank project, it works in tandem with Glenmore Reservoir, which has just doubled, and that was just in the news last week. So they repaired and upgraded the Glenmore Reservoir. So the idea is that the Springbank flood reservoir would work in tandem with the Glenmore, and it is downstream of Bragg Creek and Redwood Meadows, which was part of the controversy of picking this site. But a system of dikes, drains, berms, and that for providing flood protection for those communities is what is already underway, but that was the sort of the direction the province wanted to take. So here's an aerial schematic of the reservoir, and I'll show where this is located. Calgary would be just to the east here. Just to the north would be Cochrane. So it's just outside of Calgary and just west of Springbank. And it's really in the Springbank area. And this is the Elbow River, of course. And Redwood Meadows would be off this way. So, off this way. So that it would be, to the west. And it would not be protected by the diversion in the Elbow. It would need other protection. So here you can see the diversion structure. Here's an aerial, essentially a diversion in, and I'll show a schematic of that. A diversion in the Elbow River would divert through a man-made canal that's about 4 kilometers long or 5 kilometers long into an area, a lower lying area of farmland with a 3-kilometer earthen dam built just ahead of the Elbow. So during high flow times of greater than 160 cubic meters per second, the diversion would be enacted, taking water down the canal, filling, oops, I just need to go back here, filling the reservoir. And once the flood risk has subsided, then the water would be released from the reservoir at a relatively low rate to ensure that sedimentation issues and that aren't exacerbated back into the Elbow and through to the Glenmore and eventually into the bowl, of course. So water flow is essentially from the west going east, and Bragg Creek is located here, Redwood Meadows here, and then the diversion site is just downstream. So of course, if there's a flood that happens in this whole area, Bragg Creek and Redwood Meadows would not be protected, and therefore they needed other flood mitigation. These communities were in staunch opposition to the Springbank project. They wanted something in McLean Creek, which was upstream of them and would provide them protection. But since then, there has been some movement. The government has made a deal with Tsuut'ina Nation, which were in opposition to the project, but they've made a deal with the Tsuut'ina Nation, so they are no longer in opposition to the project. And Rocky View is not either. There remain many landowners though, and some residents around Bragg Creek and other residents that are still in opposition to the project, and it's a very healthy opposition. Just real quickly, I can just run the schematic. This is in the this is a rendition of the diversion structure that would be built into the Elbow River. So it's essentially free flowing. It's largely uninterrupted, which is, of course, much different than an in situ dam, which would be the alternative project to this in McLean Creek. This would only be enacted when there's a high flood or high potential flood rains and flows. And here's essentially a animation of how that works. So this area up here is the canal. Gates would be raised to increase further the elevation and block the flow down the elbow of the water, and then outlet gates would be lowered to allow the flow down the diversion channel. Of course, one of the issues that we're learning about and need to make decisions on is the aquatics and fish entrainment, passage through the diversion structure into the and also passage into the reservoir, and how those fish will survive in the reservoir even though it's only temporary, and also through the outlet of the reservoir back into the elbow. So that's one of the main issues for the project. So as I mentioned, the dam's 3 kilometers long. It's as high as 30 meters in places. It's uneven terrain, so that elevation will change. And its holding capacity is much larger than the Cougar Creek one I'll show you, but 70 million cubic meters. But to give you some perspective, the Dixon Dam is about 200 million cubic meters of retention capacity. So it's still large, but not as large as some of the other projects that we've seen in the province. So the alternative I mentioned to you was McLean Creek, and that is in situ. So environmentally, of course, more intrusive because you're building a dam right in the river as opposed to just a diversion structure. There is a deeply incised spot of the elbow right at the confluence of the McLean that would be that could hold a dam and have a reservoir. Appropriately sized reservoir behind it. And there, as I mentioned, there are many people that were, I guess, hoping that the province would pick that site for a number of reasons. I think it, but the big reason is that it protects Bragg Creek and Redwood Meadows, but also it is not built on private land. So you may have heard some of the controversy around the province buying the land up. There are still issues around that. Because Springbank is all privately owned, whereas a project in the elbow that's on Crown land and the province already owns the land. But it was seen as less attractive from a number of for a number of reasons than the Springbank. So the province has proceeded with the Springbank proposal to the NRCP for approval and see it. So if you're driving around there, there's still signs around the Don't Dam Springbank because of that opposition I mentioned. And that opposition in some cases has waned a little bit, but in others not. Primarily the private landowners are, many of them are still opposing the project. We are hoping to go to a pre-hearing conference before this Christmas. We're expecting a decision from AEP on the environmental impact assessment. And many of the, I mean, that was largely done Golder, Stantec, and others were involved in that, but AEP made the decision on completeness, but we're hoping to have a pre-hearing conference prior to Christmas. We'll allocate intervener funding. Those people need time to do their work in preparation of the hearing, and we give them several months to do that, but we're hoping to have a hearing held between February and April, and then a decision within 3 to 4 months following that hearing. As you know, this is, the flood was 2013. The project has been on the books since late 14-15. The official application was in 2018. So from our view, it's ripe for a decision. It's time for a decision, and we need to get on with it. The plan more just real quickly with the debris retention dam. We approved this originally in 18. They changed the structure significantly enough that we had to do another assessment, but we also approved that project redesign, which was done partly for money. The original design was very expensive, and partly for construction time in terms of reducing construction time. This is the Trans-Canada Highway that was wiped out by the Cougar Creek flood, the same flood that impacted, of course, Calgary in 2013. My car was caught in Canmore. I was in BC at the time, and it was caught there for about a week where I couldn't get at it. Luckily, not flooded. The car at least, but I mean, it was a significant amount of damage. There's a lot of infrastructure impacted, and Trans-Canada is obviously a big time, big traffic highway. So something needed to be done, and Canmore sort of took the bull by the horns to do that. And this is some of the more local damage up through Cougar Creek and up towards Outrun Boulevard, if you're familiar with that area. There was some extensive damage to homes and some other business and infrastructure as well. What the town did do immediately, it's not, super attractive, but if you've been in Canmore, and I've been up in this area a number of times, they armored the banks. They got as much done as they could, without a debris retention dam. And so that even if there was a flood in the meantime, while they're waiting for a decision as to whether they could build this thing or not, they were doing what they could to, better control and manage the floodwaters when they came. So they have concrete armored matting on an erosion-proof type of surface. They put in new culverting at Outrun Boulevard and debris net, which there's one of our site tech guys standing next to the debris net. So it's fairly large system of cabling engineered in Austria. It's effective at holding back debris. And often in floods, that's really the issue. In High River, it was at the rail crossing. In Canmore, it was at Outrun Boulevard, where debris plugs your culverting system or your water paths, and then you essentially build dams where you don't want them, and you have damage to property and infrastructure because of that. So I give Canmore a lot of credit. They did a good job even before they had approval to build a dam, and this netting was one of those things. The engineering behind this is fascinating. I saw a bunch of these in Europe as well when I was just traveling personally, and paid a little more attention to it because I learned about the debris net in Canmore. But they are used extensively through parts of Austria, Switzerland, where they have steep creeks in populated areas to control, and to control debris flows. And here you can see some of them just post flooding, and the amount these nets will capture, stretch, and without breaking. That's the whole engineering principle behind these things, and it's a whole science behind these things work, but they're pretty impressive. This is one being filmed in action during the flood. And you can see the amount of debris that's captured and held back. This is a particularly large one. Here's, again, another video of that's being held by a debris net in Europe. Geobrug, who were the people who designed one and one. So there you can see the positive effect of using that. Captures all of that debris and keeps your water flow clean. I mean, you can still have damage from water, but you'll have less damage without all of the debris. And here's the artist rendition of the structure that we've approved for Canmore. And if you've been in the Cougar Creek up there hiking, they're now constructing, but you'll see something like this at the end of the day. There'll still be access to the Cougar Creek area behind, which is a popular spot for hiking and for climbing, rock climbing. And it'll be that access will be maintained throughout construction, but also after the dam's built. It's also built to assist wildlife movement as well, because this is along the Bow Valley corridor, which is an important wildlife management and passage system. I mentioned that we do have some other recreation tourism projects. This is the one, and Cougar Creek is right here. And I put in the position of the dam location for Cougar Creek that the board approved in 2019. The gondola project and conference center is huge. It's by Stone Creek, but it would have parking facilities down below. It would gondola people up to the conference center here so they could park below, and you can get to the conference center. And from that conference, or the proposed conference center, you can go up to Lady McDonald. And if you've hiked up there, there's an old tea house up there. There's remnants of that still in a helipad. And it would essentially take you up to that spot on Lady McDonald. So likely going to be controversial. I mean, it is a huge development in terms of the conference center or hotel. So it adds to the activity population of Canmore, of course. And then running a gondola up, some people, I mean, in Europe, they're used everywhere. In Canada, there are some locations where people think it should be left in its natural state. So that would be, of course, one of the issues that would be in front of the board. We'd also approve water diversions for the use of hydro. We approved the glacier power on the Peace River some years ago. It was abandoned by TransAlta, but a MISC company is looking at reapplying for that. The MISC project, which is not far from Fairview, would be larger than the one we had originally approved, about 330 megawatt, but it's run of river. So it is still a structure across the river. It obviously needs fish passage. It impacts navigability because there's a structure across the river. And the Peace River is a bit of a different cat. I mean, it is a beautiful river, and there are, both First Nations and folks that live in the area of Fairview, Peace River, that are like the river the way it is, and putting a dam across that is, there's a reasonable amount of controversy of that. But so MISC was looking at increasing the size over the one that was originally approved to a 330 megawatt run-of-river. Some of the features are that, there's a short turnover of water in the reservoir. So in terms of methyl mercury buildup, dissolved oxygen levels, that sort of thing, they're much better managed because it's essentially held up for, I think it's 5 days or 6 days in terms of retention time, as opposed to dams that back up huge amounts of water for the use of hydro. But it would be a reasonable size increase to our sort of green side of power generation for the province. As you can see here, power up to about 250,000 homes. And with the move away from coal, we need alternatives. Natural gas might be one of them, but they're looking at river dams for the province as another alternative to coal. I think that is it. If there's not a lot of time left, I tried to extend the 30 minutes, Joe. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But once again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you folks, and I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Peter. That was interesting. The flood recovery stuff and the Canmore stuff, that's pretty impressive work there. It'd be interesting to see what happens with that conference center. I mean, it'd be nice to have another conference center in this province other than going to Banff all the time. It's always would be really nice to have, because I understand it's like 300,000 square foot conference center, so it's pretty big. I have a question here, Peter. Hydro dams are a significant source of methane emissions. They've destroyed natural riparian habitat, and even through their long-lived projects, are there ever plans to remediate the damage caused by the dam at the end of its life? Did you hear the question?
Oh, sorry, I had my mute on. I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Hydro dams are a significant source of methane emission. They destroy natural riparian habitat, and even though they are a long-lived project, are there ever plans to remediate the damage caused by the dam at the end of its life?
Yeah, I mean, that would be, an area that from our perspective, run-of-rivers are a little different, although there is still potentially production of methane, but not to the extent of essentially, standard or more familiar retention dams. In terms of remediation, the board doesn't deal with remediation. That ends up with the downstream regulator. So in this case, it would be AEC and Alberta Environment. So, remediation plans are always part of those projects. Now, to the extent that we see old dams and the ability for companies, whether they are still around, and we have that other issue as well, would be, something that I'd have to kind of look into, because the board is not our downstream regulator. So from our perspective, once we approve from a public interest perspective, the downstream regulation regulatory aspect goes to Alberta Environment.
Okay. Any other questions for Peter? No? Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for this. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Sorry about that. I was looking around trying to figure out, why am I not hearing anybody while my crazy mute was on? So I apologize for that.
That's okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks everyone for your attention this morning. It is now 12 o'clock. So we'll you'll log out of this one, and you'll log back in to the other session at 1 o'clock. If you haven't received the instructions of how to, your invite to log in, please email me directly, and I will respond with information again. So thank you everyone again, and thank you to the speakers this morning for your presentations. We'll see everyone back in an hour. Thank you.